what's up? Jason here. Today I'm going to be answering your questions. Specifically, I'm going to hit the questions related to the Unity for Beginners video that I did recently, but I'm also going to answer some questions that I get from general game developers or people wanting to be game developers who have absolutely nothing to do with that video. Things that might just actually apply to you. If that's what you're interested in, feel free to skip ahead, but not before you hit the like button, especially if you really want to see more FAQ videos or just videos where I'll take your questions and give you the best answer I can in a nice, clean, edited format. So if you're down with that, you like those kind of videos, and you like this, please hit that like button or subscribe or share it or whatever. Anyway, look for the question that you've got down below or just watch all the way through, and I hope you enjoy it. The first question I see, the one that pops up I think most often, is about this bird, and it comes as, why can't I see my bird? My bird is supposed to be here, I dragged it there, but it doesn't show up. And there are usually two causes for this. The first is the OrderInLayer option on our Greenbird's sprite renderer. If you look right here, my OrderInLayer is set to 1. If this is set to 0, it might show up, but it might not. It's a little bit weird. It kind of depends on your hardware and your setup, and it could vary even depending on when you do a build versus when you're running in the editor. In fact, if I pull this OrderInLayer down, I'm just gonna left click and drag. I can do that over any of these number variables, by the way. I'll left click and drag to the left, and you can see it disappears. What's happening is it's rendering these things in order from the lowest to the highest. So the thing with the lowest value, and a negative number is going to be lower than any positive number, is going to render first, and then the thing with the highest value will render last. So it's going to go all the way up from like -9, it'll find the next highest thing and the next highest thing, and I think right now my background is set to 0 or -1. Another thing that could cause it to not show up is the Z position being invalid. My current setup though is a little bit further along where my camera follows the bird, so I'm going to disable that and go back to a setup that's a little bit more like when we start out, and then go select the green bird and just grab this Z value, and again I'm just going to put the mouse here, hold it down and drag to the left, and watch what happens as I get far enough to the left. The bird has disappeared. So you can see he's no longer showing up. And if I go to my game view tab, you can see he doesn't show up there either. And I can even drag him forward, and he's not going to show up until I get to, well, what is it? -10. Right around -10. Now the reason for that is based on our camera's position. So I want to set my green bird to 0, but real quickly I want to show you why that's happening. Let's go to the scene view, go select the main camera. I'm going to double click on it, and we get this box here, but this box only shows us a 2D representation of what our camera is pulling in, and really our camera is 3D. We represent it in 2D, but we're doing 3D work. So I'm going to switch to the 3D mode here by clicking the little button, and then I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and use A to go to the left and just kind of turn, and take a look at what this camera is doing. It's rendering everything that it shows inside of this box. But if I move this box or I move this object too far away, like I take this bird and I start to pull it past the front of that, now it's not going to be able to render it. That's why it doesn't render it when it gets past the front of that camera view. In fact, if I pull these side by side, you'll be able to see that kind of live happening. There we go. So I'll just put that back to 0. So if your problem is happening because of this, it could be that the bird's position is wrong or that the camera's position is wrong. The default for a camera is -10 on the Z when you create a new scene, and that's what we went with. So if you moved yours or recreated it, it's possible that your camera got set to a 0 and things look weird. Just set it back to -10. One of the most common code-related issues is that people aren't seeing their auto-completion or the IntelliSense built into Visual Studio Community. And that's the code editor that I'm using, by the way, Visual Studio Community. It's the default with Windows. Now, what I mean by that is they'll go in and they start to type something like ON, and they don't see an on-mouse enter, on-mouse exit, or on-joint break, or whatever the different built-in events are. They also, maybe they're in on-mouse enter, they type get component, and they don't start to see the autocompletes there. What's happening is that Unity's Visual Studio integration is broken. It's not working, something's out of sync or just not installed right. And there are two different ways that you can go about fixing this. The easiest way is to literally just open up the Unity hub, reinstall a new version of Unity, make sure that you have the install Visual Studio option checked so that it does the install. It'll just update your existing install. It's not going to install a whole new instance of the Visual Studio editor every single time, but make sure you have that checked and it'll go through that process. Or alternatively, you can go into Tools and go to Get Tools and Features, which will pop up this little window here, and then you can scroll down and find the Game Development with Unity option and just make sure that this is installed. You may want to uninstall it and then reinstall that. Again, reinstalling Unity is easiest for me. That's usually what I do, and I constantly install new Unity versions because there are new versions and new updates all the time. So that's what I would go with, but if you don't want to do that, you can always do this option as well. The next question I see often is about sprites and images. People are trying to pull in images or sprites and having a problem with it, whether it be the bird or some other image that they found online or maybe even created themselves. And you can see it kind of like this. I have this monster down here and I grab it and I try to drag it and nothing's working. I can't even drag it over here. This other monster works totally fine. I can drag him in, I can drag him over there, and everything's good. Usually the problem here is simple settings on the actual texture file. So if I go select the monster one and find my inspector tab, then I should be able to look at the texture type, and if it's set to default, that's not going to work. The default texture type is used for 3D objects to wrap around and make like the skin of a 3D character or a 3D object. What we instead want to use is the sprite option. So we need to make sure that it's set to sprite, and then we go apply, and we should be able to then drag our sprite out here. One other thing that I wanted to note though is that if your sprite doesn't have transparency in it, so if your image doesn't have a transparency layer in it, then you won't get that nice little checkered background in the transparency. You'll have like a flat image with a solid background on it. Now to get a transparent background, you can use a standard image editing tool or just download files that have a transparent background, but you'll want to save them as a .png file. There are some other formats you can use, but PNG is the most common one with transparency that we use for sprites. Don't use a JPEG file or something else because you're going to lose that transparency. And on that subject too, if you're searching for sprites on Google and you go to Google Images, make sure you go to Tools and then choose Color and pick Transparent. It'll find all of the transparent images, or at least do a much better job of finding you transparent images that'll work well as characters or sprites in your game. Another really frustrating issue I've seen people struggling with is not being able to open up their code editor. So they're double clicking on a script file like this bird and their code editor isn't popping up and showing them what they need to edit. So how could you go about fixing that and addressing it? The first thing that you'll want to do is go to Edit and then go to Preferences. And under the External Tools section, make sure you select External Tools. You should see the Editor option here, External Script Editor. This should be set to Visual Studio Community 2019, maybe 2020, or if you're on a Mac, it should be Visual Studio Code. There are some other editors. I personally use one called Writer by JetBrains, but Visual Studio Community should be installed by default on Windows and it should work. If this is selected and it's still not working, the next thing that I would recommend is that you just try opening Visual Studio in Windows. Just hit the Windows key, start typing Visual Studio, and let it pop up, and let it go through the initialization the first time. It may just need a first setup. If you do that, when it asks you what options you want to pick, choose the Visual C# options. Don't pick C++ or anything else, just make sure you pick the C# one. Everything else just leave as the defaults. Then close the editor, close Visual Studio, restart the Unity editor, and try opening the file again. If that doesn't work, my recommendation would be to go into the Unity Hub and try installing the latest or most recent version of Unity. That'll usually fix it right up. Maybe give it a reinstall after that restart. That should fix everything up and usually addresses all of the problems. This issue is a little bit weird, and it just comes as, hey, I can't find my inspector. Where'd it go? It's missing. I'm selecting things. I go pick an image and all I see is services or navigation or some other weird thing. It's actually pretty easy to restore, and I'm going to show you two different ways to do it. The first is that you can actually click on any of these tabs, just right click, hit add tab, and choose inspector. It'll add an inspector tab there. I can take it and I could drag it over here and dock it, or I could go add another inspector tab. Oh, that one's a little off screen, but now I've got two inspector tabs. I can have as many of them as I want. I can move them all around. I could even select this one and hit the lock button and then go select something else, and only this inspector will change because this one's not locked and this one is locked. I could unlock it and it's going to pop over to my latest thing. The other thing that I could do, well, let's remove that tab, is go to Window and go to Layouts and just choose Default, and it's going to get me right back into a default layout that looks exactly like it was when I did the install. There are also a couple other default layouts you can play with, but I usually just go with the standard default. Now the LineRenderer has its own set of strange issues that seem to pop up. The first is related to setting the wrap mode on a texture. So I've seen people have pulled in textures like my right arrow and then left the wrap mode set to clamp. If it's set to clamp, notice that you'll only get one instance of that. It's not going to repeat all the way along. If I set it back to repeat, it'll actually repeat. But this isn't the only issue that I've seen. Another one is somewhat related. I want to show this in a little bit more detail. Let's go select the bird, and I've got this green arrow material set up. This is just an image that I found on Google of an arrow that looks to be transparent that I can assign. So I'm going to assign this right here. And I've got this green arrow, and well, I've got two issues. One, I've got this weird, ugly white background line going out there, and I've got the green thing just once. So if I go select my green arrow, you can see that, okay, I do have the wrap mode set to clamp, but I need to go to repeat to fix it. That's good, but I still have this weird, ugly background. What's going on there? The actual problem here is that while our texture looks like it's transparent, it's not. We either saved off a copy or a screenshot of the transparent image, or somebody else did and we just downloaded that. You can tell by looking right here, it says RGB compressed, which means it has a red, green, and a blue channel. It does not say it has an alpha channel. It would say RGBA. Let's go select the white arrow. Notice how it says RGBA. That's how we know that it has some transparency. You also notice that the transparency, the little checkerboard pattern, looks a little bit different in a real transparent image. If we go select one and we start looking at them, and we look at this one, it doesn't quite match, does it? All the rest of them are totally different scale on that background. This one has it just weird. You can tell that it's the actual image. So if this is your scenario, you can either go into a photo editor and just delete out that white part, make an alpha copy and paste it, or find a different texture. Now, when it comes to particle systems, I've seen people have a little bit of a problem not getting their clouds showing up right. So they're getting these purple squares or something else. Now, to fix that, we need to go into the cloud particle prefab. I'm going to go open it up, and I'm going to make sure that I have this one selected, not this one down here. It's kind of weird because when you're in the editor, if you select this, you'll get this inspector for that prefab asset, but I actually am in the prefab edit mode, and I want to select the child over here in the hierarchy. It's a little confusing. Just make sure that you've selected the right one. So I've got it selected, and I should be able to hit restart and see that ugly, weird purpleness. I'm going to scroll down, though, and expand out the renderer. This is why I wanted to show it, because I think it's kind of hidden. Underneath the renderer, there's an option for the material, and here I need to assign my cloud material. I could either take my material and just drop it in there, or I could hit the little search box and go find it and double click on it. Now if I restart, my cloud should show up and everything should look good. Let's go look at that material real quick though. You'll also want to make sure that this is set to particles standard unlit under the shader. You can search for unlit and you should be able to find particles standard unlit, and everything else should just kind of match my settings. Now I want to talk about tips that I would give to anybody who wants to learn game dev. I get questions all the time saying things like, hey Jason, I want to be a game developer, or I want to learn game development, but I'm really not sure where to start. Do I need books? Do I need school? Do I need courses? What should I do? How should I learn this stuff? There are a lot of options out there, and I want to go over a couple of them and then give my best free tips on how to learn game development. So the first thing is, of course, the online course option. I've got my own courses available down below, and personally, I join a lot of online courses when I want to find out how to do a very specific thing. So I'll kind of want to know how to tackle a specific topic, or maybe understand something a little bit better. I just joined an AI one very recently to learn a little bit more about AI stuff. So I recommend courses, but they're not the only option. And there are a lot of free ones, and of course the cheap Udemy ones are always available too. So outside of courses, you have the option to, of course, go to college. There are four-year programs out there, although I think right now they're all kind of shut down. I'm not sure what that looks like, but it is an option, and I know people who've done that. You could also just kind of learn on your own, and that's really what I would recommend people do to start. There's no reason to spend a ton of money or a ton of investment diving into stuff when you can really get started on your own and see if it is the right thing for you. Like, is this the kind of thing that you want to do and that you're really interested in and that you're going to love? Because if you don't love it, I would say find something that you do love and do that instead. So let's get on with the recommendations. The first thing that I would recommend, and I really want to point this out and make sure to stress it hard, is don't use a beta version of whatever editor or tools you're using. Grab the latest non-beta version. If you use a beta, you're just going to make it harder to learn. You're going to cause problems. You're going to get bad habits, and it's going to make it harder. Just don't do it. Get the latest non-beta version. I don't care what the new feature is. Get the non-beta version and install that. Get your environment set up and working. Once you're there so that you can run the editor, you can open up the code editor and everything seems okay, start with a couple video tutorials. Follow through with different people. Watch as they go through and build out a simple game. Keep these very simple. Don't do like a 20-hour tutorial. Do a 1, 2, or at the high end, I have the one linked down below, the 3-hour tutorial. Go through something like that multiple times. I'd say at least 2, maybe 3, 4 different people's tutorials, and get an idea of what that process is like and how different people do it. Because some people are going to miss some things, other people are going to miss other things, and I think watching multiple people is going to give you a much better idea of all of the parts that are required and the best ways to do things. Now, you're not going to get a whole lot from just following tutorials and copying them. So you really need to move on to step 2. And step 2 is to try recreating your own very simple micro mobile games. These are the tiny little games like Flappy Bird, the game where you tap and your guy goes up, and other than that he moves and you try not to die. The things where you have a single input and a single action that your player is doing. Don't worry about all the integrations, the Facebook stuff, the leaderboard junk, the menus, or any of that. Just get the core functionality of one of those games done. I'd start with something simple like Flappy Bird, and maybe even start with something that you've already done in a tutorial, but try doing it without the tutorial and going through and struggling through the problems. You're going to find that while you're doing it, you're like, hey, I don't know how to do this. What do I do? Oh no, I failed. I got to give up. I got to go back to this video. Don't. Just start Googling. Start looking on Google and search for the thing that you want. If you're not sure or you're not finding the right kind of results, try adding things like Unity3d to your search, or the name of the component that you're dealing with. If it's a rigid body 2D component, put rigid body 2D in your search along with whatever the problem is. And the better you get at searching for problems, the better you're going to get at finding solutions. You'll find that as software developers, we search every day for solutions to questions because there's way too much code out there, way too much in existing libraries for everybody to know everything. You have to search, and it has to become a skill that you're good at. You're going to be terrible at it at first. You're going to find all kinds of wrong answers, but you're going to get better at it over time. And when you're starting with very simple problems, they're problems that lots of people have had and lots of people have asked. So it's going to be a little bit easier to find solutions to those. So it's good practice there. Now, once you've built the first one, you built your first Flappy Birds or something, build the second one, build the third one. Go with very simple games though. Again, stick with the single mechanic. I like the little one where the circle spins and you shoot darts at it. Nice and simple. You only have to worry about, did I hit a circle? If I did, stick. If I didn't hit a circle and I hit a stick, then I die, right? Nice and easy. Find simple mechanics that you can explain in like 1 or 2 sentences like that, and then build that game out and keep repeating that process. Now, these little games should take you 1 to maybe 3 weeks. If they go beyond 3 weeks, you're probably spending too much time on them. It's possible that, you know, you just got delayed and didn't have that much time to spend on them. But if you feel like you're spending a good amount of time on it and it's going beyond 3 weeks, it's probably too big of a scope and you might want to cut it down or maybe just start again. Now, the reason that we keep restarting these games is so that we get better at the processes of, I guess, all of the beginning things. This is really about practice. It's about intentional practice to get better at stuff. We don't want to just dive in and practice on a big project. We wouldn't go dive in and start practicing being an auto mechanic on our own car. Right? You don't go out just in your driveway and start working on the car randomly, not knowing what you're doing, and just guess and see if you can figure out what's going to happen. You don't go try to build a new car as your first thing as a mechanic, right? You start small, start building up, just like or getting a haircut. You don't go practice haircutting on yourself the first time. Well, you might, but it's going to be a mess and it's going to be a disaster and it's going to be slow. So you want to do this intentional practice and just keep building these projects, keep throwing them away, but share them along the way. So as you're building them and you get them done, even though they're terrible, try to do a deployment to your mobile phone or your wife's phone or your kid's phone or your friend's phone or whoever it is, your parents' phone, or do a web deployment. You can use something like itch.io or simmer.io and deploy your game out and share it with your friends. Let people see. It might not be the most exciting game, but it's still exciting that you made it. And that's where you're going to get the, I think, thrill from, and really, I think it really pushes people to motivate and make it even more fun and make it easier to learn and just get better. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it there and just say thanks for watching. And if you had any other questions that I didn't hit in this FAQ, drop them down below. I'm going to do another update to that video sometime soon. And I want to make sure that I get everybody's questions and anything that people stumbled on figured out and answered. Also, if you have questions about just learning general game dev, let me know too, because I'd be curious to know what other questions you might have and how I can help there. And finally, thanks to everybody on Patreon. Really appreciate it. And don't forget, you can check out my courses if you want. They're down below. Thanks again. Bye.